It is time to discover, so join me as we look at history's greatest inspirational natural world explorer, Charles Darwin. Have you ever heard of him? Of course you have. He's one of the most famous scientists of all time. But what did he actually do? What did his discoveries spark in humanity? And how can we see the introspection of ourselves as a species from his words? In this video, we will dive into topics that could have a bit of a nihilistic take. So if you are feeling a bit sensitive, continue watching and let's evolve together. Charles Darwin was an English naturalist who was responsible for the theory of evolution by natural selection, which basically means that life on Earth developed gradually through a process of change and adaptation. He collected data during his travels on a ship called the HMS Beagle and published his findings in a book called On the Origin of Species. It totally changed the way we understand the natural world, but it wasn't just his scientific contributions that made him so great. Darwin was also a master of observation and a keen student of nature. In fact, he once said, "A man who dares to waste 1 hour of life has not discovered the value of it." That's a pretty powerful quote, and it really gets me thinking about how we spend our time here on Earth. We only have so much of it, so we should make sure to use it wisely. Most people live their lives thinking they will live forever, especially during our youth. We never pay heed to caution, or think death is around every corner, or that it will ever touch us. This is why in my life, I try to pay no mind to petty things that mean nothing in the grand scheme of things. Things that serve only as barriers to most people should be used as benchmark, but then left at that. I have learned from Darwin that constructs such as age are truly meaningless. It is good to record time and milestones, but most people do not benefit from constantly harping on their remaining years. It would be one thing if we lived for hundreds of years, but we live for such a short time, and in this day, life can end every time you leave your house. With a third of our lives spent growing a brain, a third spent in convalescence, and only a third in our prime. If we are lucky, then we must realize that revolutions around the sun truly only make us question ourselves. Most people feel the pressure of society and other people that if they do not do certain things, like marry or have kids by a certain age, that they are screwing up in life. But this could not be farther from the truth, your truth. This notion of wasting time by Darwin got me thinking about how if a construct adds to your life, then use it to your advantage. But if it does not, then discard it. So if you get motivation from the idea of counting 1 year closer to death, then use it to thrive. But from what I see, most people count the years and feel the curse of aging, giving to the pressures of the people around them, putting their own expectations on others to justify their own course of actions in life. So, with the introspective nature of Darwin's words already sparking the thoughts, let's dive into 4 more quotes about discovery that will hopefully inspire you to make the most of your time. Let's get into it. Number 1. I've been driven to this conclusion from a consideration of the total number of individuals which can be produced according to the law of partition and the length of time required for their development. This quote is from Darwin's book, The Variation of Animals and Plants Under Domestication, and it talks about his theory of natural selection and how he arrived at these novel notions. He was saying that because he observed that animals and plants could be modified in their offspring through selective breeding, he then concluded that the same thing probably happened in nature. He called this process natural selection because it's basically like nature is selecting which traits are beneficial and which ones aren't to suit a given environment. So the ones that are beneficial get passed down to future generations and the ones that aren't don't. And over time, this can lead to the evolution of new species. Just think about that for a second. We're all here today because of a series of lucky genetic mutations over time that allowed our ancestors to survive and reproduce. And the fact that Darwin was able to figure this out just by observing the world around him is truly remarkable. This shows me a great truth about the universe. If there is a God, it would make sense that this God would be time, and its counterpart would be truth. Just like in Hinduism, we can see that Yama, the god of death, is also considered the god of truth, because death is the ultimate truth of life, no matter how powerful and rich you are in life. So to me, logically, the most powerful entity in this universe would be the being or concept that would control time. Time is the great equalizer, the great molder, and also the greatest enemy we have, seeing that we are literally products of time, constant selective breeding for certain environmental necessities, creating a species that would one day rule this planet, reach the stars, but maybe one day spell its doom as well. This is fascinating, because along with Darwin, many have concluded that most species on this planet have their place in the ecosystem and serve a purpose. But human beings are the biggest exception. We do not serve a direct purpose other than populating an area, depleting resources and moving on to the next plot of land, somewhat akin to a virus. But even viruses have a purpose in keeping certain populations in check. This is not to say humanity does not have a purpose, or take the nihilistic view that we are a virus on this planet. But it is to show that our evolution still has not come full circle, and our place still has not been revealed. Hopefully we survive as a species to reach these answers. But it seems the petty nature of man will derail us from this if we do not get over our nonsensical squabbles. We can get into the nature of how we evolved, and was our evolution tampered with along the way. That will be a conversation for another time, but for now, to see the ultimate truth, the ultimate logic, is to see time, to see death, because they are brothers of the same entity, and rule all of our actions every day. So it makes more sense to me to worship something that truly has control over every incremental moment we live. Or is time merely a human construct? Because time has always existed in many forms, we simply came up with our own methods of putting it into increments, so we could keep track of it. But either way, time is death, and the duo rules our lives, whether we want to believe in them or not. So truth and reality are harsh mistresses, but it also makes everything more beautiful knowing we can lose it at any moment. So when hearing these thoughts of time and evolution, I think they are more worthy of worship than a possible sky wizard, possibly cooked up in the dreams of charismatic humans. However insulting that might sound, it is not meant to be a stab at people's beliefs, but rather a look at how we can use Darwin as an example to evolve to the next phase of understanding. Instead of relying on the notions of humans thousands of years ago, we can take their stories and their morals. But if history and evolution has taught us anything, it is now time to reach our best selves by giving devotion to the truth, not my truth, or your truth, the truth. Number 2. In the distant future, I see us explorers of the earth on its various continents, seeking out and exploring its inland seas and great lakes, and perhaps discovering new lands beyond the seas. Darwin was a big believer in exploration and discovery. He knew that there was so much of the world that had not been discovered yet, and he wanted future generations to go out and explore it. This quote comes from a letter that he wrote to his friend, the geologist Charles Lyell. At the time, Darwin was in the middle of his famous voyage on the HMS Beagle, and he was writing to Lyell about all of the amazing things that he was seeing. He goes on to say, "I am almost persuaded to think that all the land which is now dry is really the beds of former oceans." In other words, he was already starting to formulate his theories about how the world had changed over time. And he was excited to see what other discoveries the future might hold. This shows us that we think we have the answers, but the answers are always changing. So to keep up, we must keep an open mind to every new proposal. Darwin shows us the greatness of discovery because it opens the world up to us, and whether these truths spark outrage and chaos, they are truths, and if people cannot handle self-evident truths, then we will never evolve as a species past the pettiness. The sky is blue is not my opinion, but in today's world, it would seem that it is, because people now have the time to contemplate answers of the world according to their feelings, rather than empirical fact. Darwin seemed to know this even back then, that he could be met with vitriol, He seemed to understand human nature and how we fear what we do not know and think we know everything. Number 3. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the most adaptable to change. This is another one of Darwin's famous quotes, and it's a great reminder that it's not always the big, strong guys at the top who win. Sometimes it's the little guys who are able to adapt and change with the times. This applies to what we now know about the dinosaurs, and how mammalian life was able to survive the great mass extinctions of the time. If the mammals were not small in stature and able to flee, burrow underground, they could not eke out a living on the surface. So we must learn that we can never count out the ones who seem to be naturally selected underdogs. It has always been said that the strong rule the world, but also that the meek shall inherit the earth. Strong men have always taken what they want, but we live in a time where this is still true, but less so than it has ever been in history, because in everyday average society, the beta male can exist on the same plane as the alphas. He might not get the respect right away, but he can earn his respect over time. This is more reachable now than ever, and it seems to be the men who think, rather than fight, that will push the world forward and solve global crisis. Men who fight are dime a dozen, but men who think are a rare breed. If we can evolve as humans to not enjoy watching one human smash the face of another, if we are more interested in deeper pursuits, then there is hope for humanity. I do not hold my breath though, because since the time of the gladiators of Rome, we have always enjoyed watching the strong human demolish the weaker one. The only thing that has changed is the level of the beating has now been turned into sport. Do not count out the perceived weak, I say, because what is weak today may rule the world tomorrow. And finally, we have quote number 4. There is no greater discovery than that of our ignorance. This is a really straightforward, hard-hitting quote that gets to the heart of humanity itself. It's easy to think that we know everything there is to know about the world, but the reality is that we're all just a bunch of hyper-intelligent, hyper-emotional primates trying to make sense of things. Darwin was famous for his humility and his willingness to admit when he didn't know something. And that's something that we should all strive for. If we're honest about our ignorance, then we'll be able to learn more and understand the world around us better. In a world where we have technology and information at our fingertips, it seems that people are more ignorant than they have ever been. It seems so because we are being pulled in so many different directions and are constantly inundated with information about so many things. We do not know what to take as fact. Or we simply are just being humans, a petty but marvelous species who are capable of amazing feats, like climbing Everest peaks, and theories of the universe, but also capable of starting wars over pieces of land, tribal beliefs, and starting conflict like it is our only goal in life. This final quote leads us into what we can learn from the life and words of Charles Darwin. It can bring up many feelings inside of us and open doors to truth and understanding, but also fear and apprehension, because throughout history, that seems to be a recurring theme. So those are just a few of my favorite quotes from Charles Darwin. We have discussed some controversial notions in this video and taken some nihilistic turns, but it is not out of judgment and trashing humanity, but rather forcing evolution through the acknowledgement of certain inalienable truths. Reality can be a cruel mistress, but she will always put life into perspective, and once you have a grasp on reality, you can then mold it and shape it with your imagination, gifts and talents, thus transforming it into the fantasy world you see in your dreams. Thank you for watching, and remember, when another person spouts a novel concept at you that you do not agree with, and you think they are crazy, just remember Charles Darwin and evolve.